Well, Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you had a good and safe New Year's celebration. We'll look forward to a new year that's going to bring, I think, some significant improvements in some ways. I anticipate we're going to see the end of the Ukraine war, perhaps sometime by the middle of the year. We will see. That's speculative, remains to be seen. But in any event, I appreciate you joining with me today. You can always reach us on Twitter at SEN Richard Black, at SEN Richard Black. Today we're going to talk strictly about immigration. There was a very, very important article in the New York Times, and it was entitled, "We are not equipped to deal with this. Migrant surge overwhelms U.S. border." What makes this very interesting was the over 1,000 comments that were posted to the New York Times article and the reaction of people to those. We're going to be joined today by our friend Jim Jatras, a great expert on domestic and foreign affairs, having spent a career as a staffer with the United States Senate. So, Jim, welcome. Happy New Year to you.
Senator, Happy New Year. It's always an honor and a privilege to be with you on this program.
Well, thank you. Jim and I were discussing before the show kicked off just how dramatic the commentary that was attached to the New York Times article was. Now, the way that the New York Times works is individuals who are subscribers are able to post their own comments to it, and some of them are fairly insightful. You need to understand the New York Times, the subscriber base is probably 95% Democrat. It's a very, very liberal base. But anyway, Jim, did you have a chance to glance at some of these?
Yes, I did. And as you point out, it's given the base that the New York Times has, it's amazing that there's this level of disquiet. And in fact, the thought just occurred to me, sometimes they disable comments on things, and maybe they don't want to have some of these comments, but the thrust of the article itself almost seemed to be inviting this kind of commentary. So it makes you wonder, what was the editorship of the Times thinking of when they posted this article? What were they expecting from their readership?
Well, that's an interesting point, because often there will be articles, whether it's to the Times, to the Post, to the Wall Street Journal, and I'll look at them and I'll say, I got to say something about this, and they don't invite comments. That's not uncommon, but they do like to have opportunities for people to comment in general, and the fact that they didn't exclude and censor comments on this says something. There may be people on the staff of the New York Times website who they may have some problems with all of the migrants being dumped into New York City and the inability to deal with them. This one of the most brilliant things that was done was the border states, particularly Texas, began saying, all right, we're just not taking this anymore. If you think illegal immigrants, bringing thousands and thousands of MS-13 gang members, fentanyl dealers, people trafficking in children for sex purposes, if you think that's so cool, we're going to give you a chance to buy into this. You've got your sanctuary cities. we're going to send these people to the sanctuaries. And they've started doing it, and it's ramping up to where, the northern states and western states, they've gotten a pass on this. It's just like, oh yeah, heck with those people down in the South. We never liked Southerners anyway. And so, let them stew in their own juice. Well, all of a sudden, they're the ones who are having to deal with these exact same problems. And they don't deal with it quite as well as the southern states have done.
No, it reminds me, I think it was maybe Governor DeSantis who'd sent some people to Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, and it was just like a panic reaction up there. Oh, we're not equipped to handle this. Well, how much do you think Texas or Florida is equipped to handle this? And, under the Biden administration's what they call catch and release policy, where people cross over the border to get taken into custody, processed in a very superficial way, and then released to come back never again for their hearing at some point. You have to assume a lot of these people are ending up in these, if you will, these rather large blue cities anyway, because that's where they think the benefits will be better. Reminds me that in Europe, a lot of people, when these migrants come into the European Union through Greece or someplace like that, they don't want to stay there. They want to go to Germany or Sweden or someplace, where the benefits are going to be quite extensive. I think I saw an article not too long ago that New York City gets about 1,000 migrants a day coming in on their own. I mean, not being flown in by DeSantis or the governor of Texas, whoever. That's 300,000 people a year. How does a city deal with this magnitude of influx? And, I think maybe there's kind of a not in my backyard NIMBY kind of reaction now, even among the most liberal of voters, that they're going to see their quality of life deteriorating because of this influx.
Yeah, it's interesting that the migrants, the federal government has not moved the migrants to depopulated cities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about Detroit specifically. Detroit, once the industrial powerhouse of America, now just a rotting corpse that got into this racial spiral, this downward spiral, where there was white flight, there was incredible racial violence. And I know in recent years you could purchase a home in Detroit for $1. If you put your dollar down together with your life, you could move into one of these houses for $1. So if we're really interested in housing these people, dump them into Detroit. Send a couple million illegal aliens to Detroit City, where they can pick up houses for $1 a piece. I don't see the immigrants wanting to go to Detroit. They don't seem to have a real desire to swarm to the Motor City. I don't see them saying, hey, please give us a plane ticket to go to Baltimore or to go to Philadelphia or to go to Portland, Oregon, where we can enjoy the privilege of anarchy. No, they're going to other places where there's wealth and good times, high welfare benefits. But I've got some of the comments, and with 1,000, you just scroll through, and this first one, excuse me just a second here. This first one here is instructive because it's an overall commentary on the comments to the article. And this person says, This xenophobic comment section just cost Biden my vote. I won't vote for Trump, but I'm sure not voting for this version of liberals either. So you have a hardcore liberal Biden voter who is so angered by the comments of his fellow liberals, but he says he's not voting for Biden. He's out of it. It goes on. Here's from Colorado. Biden and party seem determined to deal themselves a losing hand in the next election. The vast majority of voters want tougher border controls and an end to the abuse of asylum. Philadelphia. Neither claptrap about humanitarian principles nor anything else requires that we let them come. We have the absolute right to decide who and how many can come. Here's Florida. The U.S. cannot be the last resort for everyone in the world who lives in a terrible situation. New York. This not only is this situation increasingly unsustainable, but Biden will probably lose the election if action isn't taken real soon. I'm a staunch Democrat, but I'm a realist. Here in New York City, we're drowning in illegal immigrants. Another one from New York. We're watching lawlessness on a grand scale here, exceedingly expensive too. It may well re-elect Donald Trump. From Canada, migrants are entering U.S. territory on the pretext of asylum. The whole shambles at the border is built on a lie. South Carolina, I can't think of one country that would take my family and me in at their expense, let alone millions of my friends. Another one from New York. I despise Governor Greg Abbott of Texas for his stance on abortion, but I don't blame him for sending the flood of immigrants elsewhere. I live in New York City. I don't want any more migrants coming to my town. Ottawa. Asylum claims are now being used to fuel a general right to migrate and cross all international borders. Anyway, it goes on, and the commentaries they're hard hitting, and you can tell the Democrats are. This is something that's overriding their normal liberal principles.
That's right. And, I don't think this means, to look at the politics of it now, that suddenly New York State is going to go for Trump in the next election. But, let's remember, he's the one who put migration on the political table back in 2016. I mean, there was a lot of angst about it in the country as a whole, but among the political establishment on both sides of the aisle, nobody really wanted to talk about it until he threw the dead cat up on the table and made everybody focus on it, build the wall, all that sort of thing. And in a way, even deep blue voters, many of them are coming to that point of view, but it still doesn't mean to me that he's going to win some of these states. And all the more reason, by the way, why in even some swing states that Trump needs, like Pennsylvania and some others, I think we're going to see an increased push just to keep him off the ballot. I mean, if that's what it takes to win an election, if they're losing even some of their core voters, maybe you have a different opinion about this, Senator, but I think that's plan A, essentially, that once he's convicted in some of these cases, to use whatever kind of political or legal chicanery they can just to make sure that mathematically he can't win the election.
I think what we're going to have is a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court that will suppress all of these attempts to take him off the ballot. I think, now there are cases that are teed up that will be headed towards the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is a very political body. People tend to think of the imagery and so forth that, well, they're these neutral arbiters, but the number one principle for the Supreme Court is survival. And they have they have an approach to the law that says that the first thing, the first principle is the survival of the Supreme Court itself. And if I think we've gotten to the point where there is so much momentum behind the reelection of Donald Trump that if he were taken off the ballot, I think it would have a very destabilizing effect on the American government. And I don't know how that would play out, but I just know that I'm talking to young people these days who are increasingly disenchanted with what America is. I think they tend to believe in what America was, but they see that America today has really turned very dramatically against the people. It's very aggressively opposed to morals, to financial responsibility, towards hard work, towards all of the fundamental things that cause a country to succeed. And it's become very pro-crime. It's become very pro-racist, with critical race theory and this kind of thing. It's become favorable towards people who don't work as opposed to those who do work. It's just very, very favorable towards criminals and very hostile towards people defending themselves against criminals. And so there's this loss of belief in the system that is beginning to creep into the American consciousness. And I think that the Supreme Court is not going to want to fuel something that could spin off in unexpected directions. So I'm anticipating that we're going to have a ruling out of the Supreme Court that's going to be a fairly strong ruling backed by the great majority of the members of the court that will say that, you know, we're not going to get hung up on some theoretical hyper technicalities and say that you can remove the principal your principal opponent from the ballot. It's because this is all being orchestrated by Biden and the Biden administration. They're saying, okay, we're going to indict this guy in 4 states and well, a couple are federal cases, a couple are state cases. We're going to bring civil lawsuits against him in other states. And we're just going to drag him down financially and tie him up to where he can't campaign. This was a very serious, very orchestrated plan, I'm sure, directed out of the Department of Justice. And it has failed because you've got Donald Trump going to court here and there, and nobody cares what's going on in the courtroom, but they care about what Donald Trump is saying when he emerges. And he says, look at what they're doing. You know, they're taking away your right to vote. And people are saying, by gosh, you're right. And this free publicity has just propelled him to an enormous dominance in the primary. And now to tell better than half of the country you're not allowed to vote, you got to vote for Uncle Joe. Isn't that's what they called Stalin, isn't it? He was called Uncle Joe. You know, so we got Uncle Joe Biden and we had Uncle Joe Stalin. I think I anticipate that thing is going to be settled by the Supreme Court. We'll see, but I think they're going to put the kibosh on the effort to pull him off the ballot.
Well, maybe you're right. I hope you're right. I guess the way I tend to look at it is that it's hard for me to see what a global decision, so to speak, on these attempts would look like as a matter of law. I mean, so far in Colorado and Maine, it's been focused on this insurrection uh, legislation post Civil War, and that he hasn't been convicted of anything. And also the technical question: does officer of the United States include the presidency? I think that's a very different legal question than what we're going to see once he is actually convicted in some of these cases, as I'm sure he's going to be. I mean, in some of these cases pending against him in state courts, I don't think he can get a fair trial anyway. And I think he will
No.
be convicted of something. Once that happens, and there's a completely different legal rationale for keeping him off the ballot in some of the key states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. I mean, Colorado really doesn't matter. Maine, there's only one electoral vote because they split their electoral votes in Maine. Only one vote he can get up there. But if he's not on the ballot in Pennsylvania, for example, and you have a very partisan governor and attorney general and Supreme Court, the election's over right there. Trump has no path to victory without Pennsylvania. And depending on what the legal theory is, I hope you're right about the Supreme Court, but it remains to be seen. And of course, that's plan A. Plan B would be to go back to the mechanisms that worked in 2020, which is where they can pull out the required number of votes from mail-in balloting and ballot harvesting and all those other funny games that we play with elections in this country now.
Yeah, the election fraud is the tremendous black swan. We've had a couple of important cases just recently dealing strictly with Democrat primaries, having nothing to do with Republicans, in which you have Democrats being caught carrying out massive voter fraud. The cases have been brought to light by other Democrats, and they're going to trial before Democrat judges. We had one in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where you had one of the most corrupt mayors in America. This is a guy who literally spent years and years behind bars on corruption charges, in federal prison, and he's the incumbent mayor. And in the primary, in the Democrat primary, I think all of the Democrats, they all know that this stuff goes on. They know how corrupt the voting system is. So this guy is very smart. He posted people by these drop boxes, and they took video, and the video showed there were a couple of black women who went to the drop boxes, and they just filled them with just hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of ballots, and that evidence was taken before a Democrat judge. And so you had a Democrat plaintiff, a Democrat defendant, and a Democrat judge. There was not a Republican anywhere in sight. And the judge threw out the election. He said, look, he said, I haven't seen that evidence. He said, I don't know who won this election. And now we've got another one. There's, and I can't recall just where it is, but this is within the last week or 10 days. Someone has been indicted in a Democrat primary for filing 118 false votes. This is the charge. So the Democrats. The Democrats know how the game is played. They know how corrupt the system is, and so they're going after one another in the primaries for cheating. Now, once it gets to the general election, they all lock arms and they say there's no such thing as voter fraud. It doesn't exist. But America has one of the most corrupt voting systems on the face of the earth. You remember when we set up elections in Iraq, and we had people, they had to appear in person, and they dipped their thumb in indelible purple ink. And this was all over the news, all over the headline, people going around with their thumb. And so, you know, even the American military and State Department all knew that if they were going to have a legitimate election, they had to be able to identify people as voters. And, you know, when we set up unattended drop boxes and allowed unidentified people to go secretly in the middle of the night and dump thousands of ballots in, where they came from, nobody knew. The system simply broke down. I was talking to a fellow the other night, and he was you know, debating whether, you know, how big the fraud was and so forth. And I told him, I said, you know, you think about it. If you're really interested in an election, if you manage to turn 3 or 4 of your close friends and get them to vote the other way, that's a pretty big deal. You feel like, oh, I really played a role in this campaign. I got, you know, Jim and Bob and Ahmad to switch their votes, and I feel good. Well, what is that now when some clown who's paid by the DNC can just go out and manufacture 1,000 ballots? And so all of a sudden, to make up for this one paid operative of the Democrats, it takes 333 people just like you influencing 3 other people. How do you possibly match the massive scale of fraud that has undermined the legitimacy of the American voting system? So I agree with you. It's a huge issue, but I think all we can do is just hope that in enough states there's a little bit more caution this year about cheating than there has been in the past.
Well, closing comment for me, and going back to your New Year's greetings at the beginning of the program, hoping things will get better this year. I certainly hope you're right about the war ending in Ukraine. God only knows what's going to happen in the Middle East. But as far as the election goes, I don't see how we get through this without some kind of very fundamental event. Either there's another stolen election and there's some reaction to that, or conversely, Trump actually does win. Then all hell breaks loose at that point. That makes like 2020 and the BLM and Antifa riots look like a cakewalk. So I really don't know what's going to happen. I think we're in for a really rough ride toward the second half of this year.
Well, I think it's going to be a very exciting year, and hopefully there'll be some good news for the American people. We've got to get to a point where the government, and this is at the national, the state, the local level, the government has to begin to turn in favor of good people and to begin to turn against bad people. I remember when I was a kid, had a knife fight with a burglar who broke into the house. I chased him out the window. He leaped out the window, and I chased him. And in the middle of the night, we're having a knife fight. I'm going at him with my snake hook, and he's jabbing at me with his knife. And finally, at a certain point, fellow Stanley Stein was the name of the fellow. Stanley Stein came out in his backyard. He switched on the the lights because he could hear. You know, I was yelling for people to come out and help. Nobody ever wants to help somebody who's been accosted by a criminal. Anyway, so the burglar made the mistake of turning to slip through the hedge, and I swung with full force with that snake hook, and I drove it about 4 inches into his shoulder. It went right through the ball joint, and terrific injury, but he was one tough cookie. And I tried to pull the snake hook out. It was just like it'd been like a spike that was driven into a tree stump. It wasn't going anywhere. He ran off into the night. I was through chasing him at that point. But when the police came, you know, the big crowd gathered around to, you know, see what was the aftermath. And the police came, and, you know, I'm sure that in a technical sense, what I did was illegal because I had chased the guy out of the house, chased him through the neighborhood. I was going to kill him. If I could have killed him, I'd have killed him. And I think I got the impression that the police officers were not anxious to, you know, to do anything to me. You know, I didn't even, to me, this was just, you know, somebody had broken in the house. I'm going to chase him. I'm going to kill him if I can. And that seemed to be justice. But the law, even back then, the law didn't allow you to, you know, chase people through the neighborhood and try to kill them. But I think there was sympathy. There was more sympathy towards that kind of reaction than there is today. Today, the immediate reaction is to say, okay, what has the good person done to offend the sensibilities of the criminal or the deviant, the sex deviant or so forth? And so we've got to turn the arrow to where American government favors the people and not criminal elements and that kind of thing. We'll see what happens, but in any event, we're going to sign off for now, and we wish everyone a very, very happy New Year. I'm optimistic. I think we're going to have some good things on the horizon, and I thank you, Jim, for being with us today. This has been Focus on the News with Senator Dick Black, retired, of course, and we will see you next Monday.